Hi, everybody, and welcome to Awaken to Your Soul Path. I am your host, Barbara, and today I am joined by the wonderful Connie Viveros. I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. And we are going to be talking about the gifts that you can find in your shadow. And Connie likes to call it the gold is in the dark, because we are all familiar with the shadow side of yourself, and about half of us are probably familiar with shadow work, but I don't think that a lot of us have looked at it in terms of the shadow is gold, or there's gold in the shadow. So I've been really looking forward to talking about this topic, because I think it will be a real eye-opener for people to look at shadow work, or confronting the darkest parts of yourself, what shadow work is in essence, that it can actually be very positive and can bring you lots of awesomeness. So thank you so much for being here today, Connie.
My pleasure, and thank you for the invite. Lovely to be here and be exploring this topic. It truly is. I said to you earlier in the preamble, is shadow work is, to me, some of the highest form of light work we can do for ourselves and the world.
Yes, no, I totally agree. But I can also imagine that people who are listening think, well, how is this then the highest form for myself? And moreover, how is this then benefiting the world? So could you maybe elaborate a little bit on that?
Sure. So for many people, Barbara, the term the shadow, it brings up a negative connotation or association, right? Because of this, it's easy just to assume that shadow work is dark, and that just the word inherently means darkness. But the aspects of our personality, the shadow is dark because we as humans are made up of both light and dark aspects. The things we perceive, we've just put a label on them, negative and positive, when it's just, the truth is, to be human, we want to be the whole range. We can't have one without the other. So you wouldn't know light if there weren't the presence of dark. You wouldn't have up without the presence of down. You wouldn't have in without the presence of out. So we learn to, this duality in our universe is really what the shadow focuses on, for us to begin to be able to explore that, so we can be whole, WHOLE.
Yes.
The shadow is simply the parts of ourselves, Barbara, that we are afraid to look at.
Yes.
The word shadow, the term was coined by the great Swiss psychologist Carl Jung, and he described it as the unconscious, disowned parts of our personalities that we just fail to acknowledge and accept. That's it.
Yes.
If we could be in acceptance, and let's just go with awareness and acknowledgement, not even acceptance. If we could just be in awareness and acknowledgement that it exists, there's half the battle of bringing the shadow, that part we disown, to the light. And then there's so much more there. The gold is in the dark was a phrase coined by my spiritual teacher, who wrote 9 books, New York Times best-selling books, on the subject of the shadow. Her name was Debbie Ford. She transitioned about 10 years ago, but she was a great teacher of the shadow work, and taught me that that's really mind to mind inside of me, and find the gold, find where I've negated and disowned and shut down and lost my access to those parts of myself. And I could never be whole. I was in a frustrated state of being. And that's really what the shadow work is.
No, you're absolutely right. And I love the way you're explaining it, because we all know yin and yang, and we know that there's yin and yang, and there's yang and yin, and that's the duality also, but also the balance in the duality. So there needs to be light in the dark, and there needs to be dark in the light, because that's how things are balanced. And there are aspects of ourselves that a lot of people don't want to acknowledge, that they're in denial of, or that they're trying to hide or run away from, that they don't want to work on, or even acknowledge, and let alone accept that they are there. But when you find well, the courage to look at these parts of yourself that you might be ashamed of or scared of or unhappy with or any of those things, then what we often see is that underneath all of that, there's a lesson. Or something to be learned about that type of behavior, because it's always for a reason. And if you can uncover that reason, if you can uncover that lesson, then it usually leads to something eye-opening or life-changing or otherwise amazing.
Absolutely. That's exactly it. That's the gold.
Yes.
Therein lies the gift. You're talking about when we discover the wisdom in our wound, there's the gift. That's how we extract the gold from it. And if it's every aspect of ourselves, if it's not exposed to the light of our consciousness, then we can't live in that wonderment. And you talked about, as children, which is typically where the shadow is birthed and born. Just think about, again, from my teacher, the adage and the analogy she would often use is think of the baby. She would hold a baby up in our workshops, and, who wouldn't and care for a precious child, a baby, and give it nurturing and love. And yet a baby can have the full range of expression of emotions. It can go from crying and fits of, upset and anger, all the way to gurgling and happling and cooing in a span of about 10 minutes.
Yes.
And that's that full expressed range of emotions.
Mm-hmm.
And as we grow up and as our caregivers work with us, our well-intentioned parents that do the best that they can at the time, we begin shutting down certain emotions so that we only have access to those that are deemed good or that we
Yes,
receive.
or socially acceptable or desirable. That's often what happens based on the upbringing that your parents have had and the beliefs that they have taken over. I call them the rules, the bullshit rules of family, or the bullshit rules of life, or the bullshit rules of society about the way things are supposed to be. Or you're supposed to be a prim and proper woman, and you're supposed to be a certain way, or as a man, you're not supposed to show emotion. You need to be strong and you need to be the caregiver. And all of these views of how people are supposed to be then trigger well, I want to say educational behavior, but I'm not sure if it actually is educational behavior, but they trigger a behavior of a parent saying, oh, you shouldn't be doing this, or you shouldn't be saying that, or you shouldn't be acting like a tomboy. You are a girl and you should wear skirts and you should behave like a lady, and that's not ladylike, or that's not the way a man should be or act or do.
So let's just walk through a typical scenario, and one that might be familiar or common is you have let's say it's a 5-year-old boy, and he's very in touch with his feelings. I have an 8-year-old grandson, and he's an empath. He's a sensitive being. He's sensitive and emotional. And something happens, and he gets upset and frustrated and mad, and he cries. And from the other room or sitting right there, his father cries, "Stop crying! Grow up, little man. Be a man." And his dad believes or his crying is bad. And so the son at 5, in order to get love from his father, suppresses that emotion. And as a result, he grows up, and this gentle, sensitive side of him, he doesn't have access to because he believes it's bad and it's not being, a man. And as an adult, he has trouble feeling. He has trouble expressing his emotions, particularly his sensitive emotions.
Yes.
And he struggles in relationships. He's never allowed to be fully seen. I mean, that's the indication that that shadow is in place. So another one would be a little girl who's angry, right? And she throws tantrums as a little girl. And she immediately hears from him, "Stop that, stop being so bad," or "Stop that behavior." And again, every time she gets angry, her mom will say something. Mine was, "Stop being so full of yourself," was one I used to hear very often in my childhood. And so we, at that age, at that time, Barbara, we don't have the emotional capacity or wherewithal to process, psychologically what that means. So we simply mean we must be bad.
Mm-hmm.
We can see that. My angry little girl thinks I have to try really, really, really hard not to get angry. Like that's my job.
Mm-hmm.
And so over time, what happens is we disassociate from the anger, but it doesn't make the anger go away.
No,
It
we just
only,
bury it.
we just bury it. And so later in life, growing up as an adult, and people on your call might relate to this, the angry girl thinks she has to have it all together all the
Yes.
time. She
Cannot show weakness.
can't show weakness, can't show anger, can't show frustration. And invariably, she's in a work environment, people trigger her, push her buttons. She might feel like she wants to explode, but she can't. And she realizes that her anger is there all the time. And for women in particular,
Mm-hmm.
it shows up as passive aggressive behavior, right?
Yes.
And issues with work, issues in relationships. So when we go in and we begin to work with the shadow, that's what's at stake.
Mm-hmm.
That's what's at stake. These emotions have a stranglehold over our behavior, are released, and we're able to let go of some of that. So that's why the shadow is a good thing. That's
Yeah, yeah.
Huh.
I totally agree. And I recognize what you're saying, because when I was growing up, I heard things as, oh, but you are so sensitive all of the time, or don't take everything so personal, or you really need to learn how to grow a thicker skin, or you really need to learn how to let things go. And I also have this gift of knowing. So I knew things, and that scared a lot of people in my direct environment. It scared my parents, it scared my aunts and uncles. So I constantly got told to behave differently, or to not do this, or to be tougher, to be stronger. And I came to the conclusion that I wasn't good enough the way I was.
Right.
And that made that I wanted to change myself in what I thought I needed to be in order for them to accept me, or to like me, or to love me. And as I grew older, it meant that I was sort of like a doormat. I let everybody walk all over me, because I felt I cannot express what I'm really feeling. I cannot show who I really am, because people don't seem to like that version of me. So I worked so hard being the ideal daughter, the ideal friend, the ideal daughter-in-law, the ideal employee, you name it. So I always call that wearing masks. I had a mask for when I was with my friends, a mask for when I was with my family. And in the end, that is a big part of why I ended up in my burnout, because I was not being myself. I couldn't be myself. It also meant that I was constantly attracting the wrong men into my life, and I was also regularly losing my job, never because of fault of mine, but because of outside circumstances. And all of these things chip away at you, at your soul, at you, at the inside, and it sort of reinforces, oh, you see, they were right, I am not good enough, I am not worthy, and I need to work harder, I need to try harder, I need to mold myself into whatever version I need to be, but I have no clue what version that is.
Absolutely. I mean,
That
you're right on target with how the shadow grows stronger as we feed into it. As our belief systems and our conscious mind, we start to allow it to hold its place in our existence, because it starts to wreak havoc in those areas, particularly, like you said, our self-worth, our self-esteem, our ability to just feel like we belong
yes.
and we have a place in this world. But I assure you, Barbara, and this, that's why we're talking here today, is, it doesn't go away.
Oh no, not by itself. No.
It simply gets repressed and shoved down into our subconscious mind.
Yes, and triggered all of the time with new things by other people. So inevitably you will reach a point in your life where it just sort of explodes or implodes, because it's an unworkable situation. It's not something that can keep on continuing. And when that happens, then, well, something needs to happen. And often people don't know how to handle it, or how to deal with it, or where to even start. So what would you tell them? What would you advise them?
Well, what goes into our subconscious is everything we reject about ourselves. It's that unacceptable, unwanted parts. And in order for us to get love and receive love and feel at least like we can maintain, like you said, we put on these masks. But the minute you say something is bad, you have a reason to suppress and deny it. So even though the shadow is unseen, it really does, it lives right beneath the surface of our consciousness. And another analogy that we used to use in our work with Debbie was she called it the beach ball effect. And so we're really good as adults and strong, vibrant, full of energy beings to be managing all these shadows. And you know the energy it takes to keep a beach ball submerged underwater?
Oh yeah,
I mean, it
with
takes a
all that
lot.
air that wants to go up.
It takes a lot of energy, but we're managing keeping it suppressed. That's the
Mm.
effect of the shadow. And when in a moment of weakness or fatigue or, tiredness, what happens to that beach ball? It pops up and hits us in the face.
Yes.
That's the risk we run when we don't allow the shadow to, be submerged or be emerged and begin to work and to heal it. And so because the shadow operates outside of our conscious awareness in the
Mhm.
form of our limiting beliefs, this is why we need to go into finding those shadows. And we start with our triggers. We start with those things that annoy, aggravate, and we criticize in others.
Mhm.
And that is called projection.
Mhm.
And those then become our shadows. Those become our triggers, excuse me. So let's say a girl is born with a great sense of self. She's really strong and bold, and she knows who she is. She knows what she likes and she doesn't like. So she's a strong little girl, but she's raised in a family that always says to her, stop being too much. The parts of you that are strong and confident, are being rejected. And so she then rejects those parts of herself and she becomes this quiet, sweet, obedient girl, much like your
Mhm.
story.
Yeah.
But she, growing up, doesn't understand why her life is so painful
Mhm.
because truth is suppressed. The aspects of herself, therefore, she feels divided. She has this shadow side that doesn't know how to bring it into the light. And she has these positive aspects that are contained in the shadow that she's afraid to tap into.
Mhm.
So we become fragmented. The shadow becomes a fragmented parts of ourself. So have you ever met anyone that's really gentle and sweet and kind, and in the blink of an eye, they can be turned into something else?
She devil, yes, or he
Yes.
devil, yeah.
They become angry and scary and throw the biggest tantrum, and you
Mhm.
think, oh my gosh, this is a crazy psycho person. That's
Mhm.
because, Barbara, they have two parts of themselves operating in their lives, and the shadow, that's the beach ball effect.
Mhm. Well, I
And
recognize that in my life. That's a part of why I called myself doormat. It took a lot to get me angry, but when I was angry, it was out of proportional, severely angry, and it didn't really want to go away that easy. And it scared me for a long time. I was scared for the underlying anger that I was aware of, but I just was afraid to let it out because I didn't know the ramifications. I didn't know the extent of it. I was very scared of how many people it might hurt, or the things that might come out when I would acknowledge it.
you probably retreated even more
Yes.
from, all the friends in society, and even cocooned yourself even more so. And you got triggered. Yeah, that trigger, we often underestimate. In fact, I would say 90% of people underestimate the power of the shadow, thinking it has no power over us.
Mm-hmm.
Shadow is very powerful. It can turn
Yes.
your life upside down and destroy a cherished relationship in, a heartbeat when we let those suppressed shadows pop up.
Yeah, but a lot of people are unaware of that this even exists or the mechanics of this. So I had a lot of things happening that I just didn't understand. And I had no idea why they were happening or how I could change things. And I did try a couple of things, but it was just not really working. And I kept thinking that it was me. that
Right.
there was something wrong with me, or that I was doing something wrong. And it wasn't until I came into contact with someone who really knew their stuff and was able to guide me in this area, and I really started to do shadow work, that things started to change. And I've done a lot of different types of shadow work, and lately I've been for the last couple of years I've been really diving into the gene keys, which also have a shadow side and then a gift and then the city within the keys, and that's very related to shadow work itself. It's really seeing, if you are not being yourself, how does that show up in your life? What are some of the characteristics that you recognize when you're not being yourself? And if you are being yourself, then you're tapping into your gift, and how does that show up in your life? And how can you consciously heal, but also move from when you recognize the shadow into stepping into the gift?
Yeah, that's a big question. And our formula, the one that I learned and the one that I work with quite regularly, even with myself to this day. So the truth of the matter is that we have many, many shadows. We have hundreds, if not thousands of shadows. And they aren't as they're the big ones, but then there are the more ancillary, secondary type shadows that you're bumping up against quite frequently in your life. And the formula that I like to use is unconceal, reveal, and heal. Heal and integrate. So separation and division are not the natural states of anything. Integration and wholeness is. So as human beings, the first step is to unconceal, like reveal what it is that's triggering you, what it is that you're disassociated with, what emotional wound, because oftentimes we forget.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if something this occurred to you, you can't even find, that it's your strong-willed, strong voiced little girl that was suppressed when she was 3, 4, 5 years old. And here we are 30, 40, 50 years old, and we forget.
Yes.
Again, it's like trying to go back to your childhood home and find a marble or a penny that you hid. You just wouldn't remember. So we have to go in through a process that I use in teaching, and I was trained in psychosynthesis, where we dissociate with the emotion, the feeling or behavior that we're triggered by, and then we invite that aspect of ourselves to come forth, to have a dialogue with us in this guided meditative format, so that we can learn to begin to reestablish connection with that aspect of ourselves. So that's the unconcealing first. What is it that triggers you? What is it that bothers you? Is there someone at work, someone in your family, someone you might be married to, something in your children's behavior?
Yeah.
And once you identify that, the first step is to own, and the second step is to own and embrace. First, you identify, unconceal, reveal, own and embrace. If that aspect exists out there in them, then it has to exist in me. You can't see anything that isn't a part of you. You spot it, you got it.
Yeah.
So you identify what it is. Is it like that person's anger, that person's greediness, that person's hostility, that person's selfishness? What is it in them that you're projecting that you need to reclaim and own? And it's not, that's where people get tripped up. They're like, I'm not that. I'm not that. But the truth is, Barbara, we're everything. There's
Yes.
nothing we cannot be. So the degree that you want to do shadow work, you need to go in and find those things. And then the other piece to that equation is patterns. What keeps happening to you over and over and over again, that circumstances may change, the players may change, but it's the same situation, it's the same scenario.
Yes, I recognize that. That was before I was doing this work. Is the thing that kept happening.
Right.
The same type of thing. Indeed, different players, different outside things, but the inside was always more or less the same.
We call those the themes of our stories, right?
Right? Yes, exactly. And I also recognize what you're saying when you're triggered in something. What used to trigger me a lot was what I saw as selfish behavior. People only thinking about themselves or not taking responsibility for their own actions or things in that. And I recognize that it triggered me so much because I never did anything remotely like that, because that had been beaten
Well,
and taught out of me. So
right.
I was repressing, suppressing that part. I never was selfish. I never thought only about myself, especially not when it hurt other people. So it was really difficult seeing people constantly doing stuff like that. While I,
And yet, I'm going to just hold you there for a moment. And yet, the reason it's a trigger for you is you've disassociated with your own greediness, your own selfishness. It's not a bad thing, but it's somewhere, I'm going to assert, in your life in childhood, you may have acted out greedily or selfishly, and you were shamed for that. You were humiliated, and maybe multiple times, Barbara, where you said, "Oh, it's not good to be that." Therefore, you said, "Okay, greedy little selfish self, you're not okay. So I'm going to put you in a closet or the basement of my life and shut you away because I don't get love. I don't
Mhm.
get my needs met. I don't get when I behave that way." And again, we're the whole person. It's not, you're also loving and brilliant and generous and kind and sweet, but we're also selfish and greedy. And sometimes it's good to be selfish.
Oh yeah, most definitely. What comes to mind when you're talking about this is there was only attention for my brother. And I really wanted attention from my mother too. And
Right.
in that sense, then you're greedy, you're hungry for love and attention.
Right. And you somehow, something was taken away for you. And the one underlying result of a shadow being born in us is shame, humiliation, and guilt.
Hmm.
And when it happens to us at 3, 4, 5 years old, even as babies, younger than that, we don't have the emotional capacity to process it and understand
No.
it, be adult about it. And so we just say, well, it's not okay to be that way. And so that births a shadow. And then you start to use the mask. Well, I'm gonna not want attention. I'm
Hmm.
gonna I'm gonna always sit in the background and just be the observer. And I'm not gonna demand and be selfish and require my mom's attention.
Hmm. Yes.
And you grow up and it becomes a way of being for you, and you've disowned that part of yourself to be a little selfish. And one of the antidotes of unraveling that can be, what's what's lovable, what's good about being selfish.
Hmm.
How can selfishness actually be a very loving act toward yourself or
Yes,
others?
because that's also both the yin and the yang. So
Right.
it's not 100% pure bad. There is always good in bad, and there's always bad in good. So I love that you're explaining it that way, because that's the first time I'm actually hearing that.
Yeah, because the truth is, for you to constantly be, letting other people take the limelight,
Hmm.
and always acquiescing to that, you eventually get burned out, trampled. You even said trampled on, walked over. That is a syndrome. That is an outpicturing of you constantly acquiescing.
Hmm.
And it gets exhausting.
Yes,
It's
extremely
exhausting.
exhausting.
It's exhausting to always be in, always be the bridesmaid, always be in the waiting room, always be waiting, like, when's it my turn?
Hmm.
When, this aspect of you that is been shut off is your brilliance. And here you are now, after working on your shadows, using your voice in a
Yeah,
limelight way. So I would say to some degree, you've actually gone in and healed that to be able to be in a public forum like this on a, public broadcast and podcast, to be
definitely.
shining your light and talking about these things. But, we project our shadows, our anger, guilt, shame onto others, the things we don't like about ourselves. We lash out at people for the behaviors they're exhibiting that we don't like in ourselves. So
Yes.
pay attention to how you project yourself into the outside world,
Hmm.
because the universe, as long as that's in place, will bring us as gifts people, places, circumstances that mirror and reflect that.
Yes, because you're being triggered in it because you need to do something with it. You need to heal it or bring it into the light.
And a trigger is simply a reminder of a past trauma.
Yes.
The trigger is simply that place in you that's like, ooh, that still hurts, that wound. Again, my
Mhm.
teacher used to call it like you keep ripping the Band-Aid off of
Yes.
that wound. A scar is healed, like touch it, it doesn't hurt anymore. You can have the scar, but if it's not healed, you keep ripping the Band-Aid off and it hurts.
Hmm.
That's the trigger. The
Yes.
conflicts in our lives are messengers that enable us to become conscious of something that is buried deep within us that
Hmm.
needs healing. So pay
Yes.
attention to our triggers, because they can be like road maps, treasure maps to our shadows.
They are the messengers that tell us where some work can be done, or preferably should be done, in
Right.
order to free ourselves. Because as long as you are constantly being triggered, you are sort of in a holding pattern, sort of a slave to this pattern of constantly being triggered until you change something, until you respond differently or learn something or work on it to get out of that constant reoccurring pattern.
Yeah, we call it the merry-go-round, the rat wheel, whatever you want to call it. Is that repeating patterns in our lives that are always pointing to our shadow patterns, because the shadow mirrors itself in your reality. The
Hmm.
shadow wants you to become aware of it.
Yes.
I think that's almost sometimes people's life path is, you know, where's the shadow? What's the shadow showing me now? It doesn't have to be, because you can eventually live in peace, harmony, and, relative bliss.
Hmm.
But, it's funny because, excuse me, even though I've done a lot of healing, the shadow will still show itself.
Yes.
And even though I'm in a place of that awareness, I can say, isn't that fascinating? Like, there's the pattern. I can see the pattern in
Hmm.
my family dynamic or in my work dynamic. And it's like, wow, I'm not triggered by it. I'm in observation,
Hmm.
but it's still present.
Yes,
It's
and but
present.
that's the beauty of the shadow work, right? That you're moving from constantly reacting into being more of a spectator instead of the victim. So a lot of people that feel a victim to circumstances or a victim to people or things like that, that indeed are constantly triggered in the same way or constantly attracting the same types of situations, same types of people, bad relationships, unemployment, or whatever is a constantly recurring pattern.
Right.
They are the people that would benefit greatly from shadow work because, well, for me it was liberating. It frees you. It's not that it goes away completely, but your role in it completely changes, and you're going from the victim to much more the spectator. And even, well, it also really depends, I've noticed, on my level of energy, how well I've slept, and all the other things that are going on. If a lot of things are already happening and I'm sick or I haven't slept well or it's that time of the month, all of these factors also play a role into um, how you can be triggered, the severity of the trigger, right?
Yeah. And I mean, I'll speak to my own scenario. Is I was, a woman that you would have looked at 30 years ago and said, well, she's got everything. She's got, a beautiful marriage. She's got beautiful children. She has a lovely house. She's got, cars in the driveway, kids go to the great school, activities. I had friends. And yet I was angry inside. I was that little girl that had displaced, disassociated anger. And when I did the shadow work, I would have these outbursts at my kids where I would have these, kind of irrational outbursts of anger, fits of rage at my children for, whatever, not picking up after themselves or not, doing the dishes right or whatever it was. But I would, and it would be like almost like a volcano where it would build and build and build and build and explode in that moment of tiredness and then come crashing down on them. And I have apologized to all my children since then. They're all grown adults now.
Yeah.
But when I went in to do the shadow work, what I found was who my enemy was, who I had in the basement, chained in the basement, was my angry, hateful bitch.
Mm-hmm.
I was not okay with her being a part of my life.
Mm-hmm.
And when I made amends with her, when I did the psychosynthesis, I brought this old, decrepit looking witch, dark, scraggly hair. She was dirty, filthy. She was just not pleasant. And yet, what's the love she had been denied?
Mm-hmm.
What she hadn't been getting. And that's the healing, the integration part. When you can begin to understand that really the birth of our shadows was born out of deep compassion for ourselves, to receive, to be loved. Can't let that part of me exist because I don't get love for it. We're able to soften and start to acknowledge and integrate this aspect back into our lives. And my anger is actually a very good thing.
Yes.
I've learned and I've made peace and amends with my anger. I've apologized profusely to everyone that was around me in my first 40 years of life. And, I'm angry about certain things, the state of being in the world. I now work to build schools for girls in Africa because it's not okay for us to be, just by virtue of living and being born in this side of the world, that they have to deal with those circumstances of dirty water and no schooling and early marriage, things like that. There's just a disparity in our world. So I've used my anger and I've, turned it towards something in the world where it's a positive force.
I love that.
And now my anger in me as an emotion, I use it rather than it using me, especially inappropriately. And that's the benefit of when we make peace with these repressed, disassociated emotions that live inside of us.
Exactly.
We have to do the work and go on the, the journey, the treasure map to find it, to understand fully the gifts of it.
Yes. And when you were sharing your story, and thank you for sharing that, it reminded me of a series that I had been watching. It's called Lock and Key. It's about the family Lock, and it's Key House. And they find all of these keys that unlock things, but it's magical. And one of their keys is called the head key. And the daughter of that family, the father was brutally murdered, and then they moved to their father's parents' house, and she didn't want to go there, and she's broody and angry and moody and, well, very much a teenager. And then she uses the head key, and then this version of her comes out with long pointy claws and hairs that are sticking up everywhere, dressed goth with everything black lipstick, and just, you couldn't speak. The only thing that she could do was at everybody and growl and claw and being very, very angry. And then she took that and she locked her. They also have a chest key. She took that version of herself and locked it in the chest to be rid of it. And afterwards, she was this cheerful, happy, bouncy girl, and everybody was looking like, what happened to you? And that's because she took that part of herself, and instead of dealing with it and working on it and uniting it and incorporating it in her and giving it love, she just locked it away. But the change in her was huge. So it reminded me of that when you were telling your story. It's a beautiful visual. Thank you.
Right. And today I can say I'm at peace with my anger. It's an integrated part of me. I'm not going to say I don't ever get angry or frustrated. I just am aware of it. And so I can work with it. I have tools and techniques that I can bring into my life, meditation. I know when it's a timeout and I need to step away from things without making it, meaning something's wrong with me or the other. It really does mitigate and eradicate blame.
Mm-hmm.
It's not the other person's fault anymore. It just is. It's
Yes.
just I'm being activated. My emotions are being activated in a way that I need to go self-manage. I need self-care. I need to go be a little selfish and go take a bath or go take a walk or go into nature or meditate.
Yes.
I've learned that we are human beings and we have this full range of emotions. And just because at 8, 9, whatever age we were told that was wrong, those emotions are still within us. The dark doesn't disappear.
No. No.
And
Exactly.
if it does, and if you feel it is that is the source, suppressed emotions, I believe, and this is a personal opinion, but I believe repressed and suppressed emotions are at the root of all the violence that is perpetrated in our world today.
I believe that too, but I'm taking it one step further. It's not just all the violence, but also, dare I say, all of the diseases that we're having.
Disease. We're at disease with our emotions. And so it has to go somewhere. And if everything in truth is energy,
Mm-hmm.
emotion is simply that. When my grandchildren now, I have 4 grandchildren, and crying now, it's like, I remember, I'm going to call him out on this, but my son-in-law said, there's no crying at the dinner table.
Mm-hmm.
This is my grandson. I forget how old he was at the time, but I was like, it's okay to cry at the dinner table at grandma's house. It's perfectly fine. It's just emotion. It's just energy that needs to come out.
Yes. And it's
I
better to
promise.
let it out and to let it flow than to
And
suppress
then
it
we
and tuck
and
it
we
in.
move and we move on. We move on. But tears and crying and that emotion is the emotion just coming and percolating up and spilling out the top. And it has to go somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Whenever you try to gulp or not breathing too, take a breath. I always say to them, take a breath, you guys.
Yes.
Little boys, they like to just get a little ahead of themselves. Like, just stop and take a breath.
Mm-hmm.
Just bring yourself down for just a moment, process that emotion, and now, we'll move on. But yeah, it has to go somewhere, and it will create, dis-ease within our body temple
Disease, discord, yes.
if that's what we do to our emotions. When my grandson, again, I'm using him a lot as a reference, but got him a little pillow and a little plastic red bat.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like, you have feelings. And he would get very frustrated. And so we would make just a game and we would just go out and just bat this pillow just to feel that feeling and remove the rage, because it
Mm-hmm.
is an accumulation. It's an accumulation of everything we're hit with and met with out in the
Mm-hmm.
outside world, television and TV and the social media. And it just becomes overwhelming sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Yes. I didn't discover this until I was well in my 20s, but I had a punching bag for a
Yeah.
while where I could just vent the anger and the frustration by punching it out, because that's a safe way of releasing it. And you can indeed also, before that, I used a pillow, because you need to just, you need to let it out. You need to let it flow and you need to let it out. And if it's not possible at the moment that you're experiencing it, because we all know situations where maybe it's your boss that says something and you feel like, yeah, but I cannot punch him in the face because that would cost me my job. But
Exactly.
and so you might suppress it in that moment, but then later on revisit it and then let the emotion play its part, and let it out by hitting something, not a person but a pillow or a punching bag or something like that, to just really go through the emotion that's there, because it's there for a reason.
Right. And it's there for a reason, to clear you out, to make space for the good emotions to emerge. Again, the more we feed that, the more it grows. The more
Mm-hmm.
we feed that suppression and oppression of those emotions, the more it festers, it grows into depression, it grows into anxiety. The dark is just, or the shadows are just the others, are on the other side,
Yes.
waiting for a time to show their face. And
Mm-hmm.
when it does, you may or may not be expecting it. So it's better to do the work. So when it shows up, you're like, oh, I know what this is. And you have the tools and the wherewithal to make peace with that.
Yes. Yes. Oh, this has been such a wonderful talk. I
Oh,
think
beautiful.
we touched upon some really relatable subjects. We shared relatable stories. I think that a lot of people that are listening or watching this right now, and if you are one of those people, like the video or comment underneath it. We would love to hear from you. And if you haven't already done that, subscribe to the channel so that you don't miss any new episodes of this TV show. But I can imagine that you think, oh, this explains so much, or you've gotten some wonderful insights out of what we have discussed here today. And I can also imagine that you might be thinking, oh, but I want to do something with this, or I want to talk with Connie or with you. Well, how you can reach me, you obviously already know, it's in the show notes, but how can people contact you, Connie? Where can they find you?
Well, there's a myriad of ways, and the first place is my website, which is angelsemerging.com. So however you get to the internet, and angels with an S, and on there are my services, and I do offer shadow coaching and packages of mentoring, as well as, single sessions. But shadow work isn't a one and done. This work for me was necessary because I wanted to improve and be a better person in the
Mhm,
world. And I knew I had things within me that needed work.
mhm.
And the truth is, no one can do it for you. So
No.
as a coach and a mentor, we really guide you in that way to bring forth what's suppressed and showing up in your life.
Mhm.
And I always like to say, I meet people where they are with themselves and in their work. Shadow work doesn't have to,
Yes.
Barbara, be a huge thing that requires years and years. Sometimes it's just a few ornery shadows that are that, story or that theme that keeps playing in relationships, jobs, money, body health, lifestyle. Those are the common things I see in shadow work. And
Mhm.
yeah, when you start shadow work, you may feel again like that vulnerable child, but really that's the child that needs to be reparented back to that fully expressed human being. We want to be fully expressed. We want to love our anger, our sadness, our bitterness, our greed. We want to love those parts of ourselves so that the duality of that aspect can be even more in our life as well.
Yes, no, I cannot agree more. And I always say the same thing. I meet people where they are at and where they actually need the help. It's not a one size fits all. No, it's really tailored to you and the things that you're working on. So I love that you have the same ideas and the same work ethic, because I think that that's the only way to go, because everybody is unique and everybody's story is unique and everybody's experiences are unique. So everybody's shadows are unique for them, and the way to work with them or to work through them should be unique for them as well. And for myself, the last thing I want to add to this is that it gave me freedom, a lot more freedom to be who I really am, a lot more freedom to experience life in an effortless way. It used to be very non-effortless, struggling,
Yeah.
and now it's a lot more effortless, and I'm enjoying it so much more. And those are one or two of the main benefits, along with the ones that you named, of doing your shadow work. So if you are watching, if you are listening and you feel called to do something with this, reach out to Connie, reach out to me. We would both love to talk with you, to help you. You are not alone, and you're also not a lost cause. There is hope, there is light at the end of the tunnel, and the only thing that you need to do is make the first step, because indeed what Connie is saying is true. You need to do most of the heavy lifting. We can only show you the way and maybe reach some tools and help you gain some clarity and insight, but yeah, the heavy lifting is done by the person that's dealing with the shadow, but you don't have to do it alone. That's the end message that I would like to give. So thank you so much for being here, Connie, for this wonderful talk. And you listener, viewer, thank you so much for being here, for listening, for watching, for showing your support. I love all of you, you watchers and viewers, and I hope that you will be back here next week to listen in on the topic that I'm going to be talking about with my next guest. Thank you, Connie. Thank you, everybody, and have an amazing rest of your day wherever you are.
Well, that was